Hey, what's up? My name's Tamer Dave Whitley, and for the next little while, I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that Grandmaster Dennis Rogers and myself will be covering at OldTime Strongman University. Now, the first thing that I want to talk about is principles that apply to feats of strength, and it doesn't necessarily apply to every single feat of strength that I can think of, but it applies to most of them, specifically bending and ripping and that sort of stuff. Not so much with lifting, but anything that has to do with destroying an object, these principles tend to apply. The first thing is force application. What we want to do to be able to destroy an item, be it a spike, a long piece of steel, a horseshoe, a deck of cards, a phone book, whatever it might be, we want to be able to maximize the amount of force that our body is producing and direct that force into the weakest point of the object that we're doing the feat with. I will use I'm gonna do a couple of examples. I'm gonna show you basic technique on a couple of different feats. The first one is ripping a deck of cards. I got a brand new deck of cards here that I'm gonna take out of the box, and I'm going to graphically depict what I'm talking about in terms of how force production and the physics behind particular feats tends to work. I explained this to a martial art jiu-jitsu player friend of mine, and it made a lot of sense to him because the principles are almost identical in that it's taking maximal leverage from my body and putting it into a weak point. In the case of jiu-jitsu, it would be a joint or a choke, something like that, putting it into that weakness so that you can completely dominate it. So the same kind of thing applies with feats of strength. Now, what I'm going to do is break it down into some base level components here. The first thing that I want to have in place is some sort of a secure base that's holding the object. What do I mean by that? If you think of your hand as a vise, right? If you had this deck of cards and you put it in a vise and you clamped it down, it would be much easier for you to rip it than if it wasn't in the vise, right? Same thing holds true with a piece of steel like this nail. You'd put that nail in there and you'd clamp the vise down on it, and then you could use whatever leverage is necessary to be able to exert force into the other end of it. So the first thing that we're going to have is we're going to have a vise action. With the card ripping technique that I'm going to show you, it's going to be my left hand, and I'm going to create this little shelf here that the cards will sit on, and it's going to go into this fold right here into my hand. My index and middle fingers, we're just going to talk about them for a second, are going to come in and they're going to clamp that way, okay? My thumb is going to come in from the other side, and it's going to clamp this way, okay? Put it all together, and from this angle, that would look like that. Now, the other fingers, the cards are resting against the ring finger there. That ring finger will come in and be right on that corner, and the pinky is there to just sort of back it all up. So the entire thing, the entire vise looks like that. Now, the pressure is this way, right here, and it's this way here. So I want, when I'm exerting full pressure, my hand remains in that position. What I don't want to have happen is to close that fist into a clinch position, because that will make the cards go into this little dome shape, make it much more difficult to rip, make it much more difficult to control with precision where the force goes. So that is the position right there. So I encourage you to strip down to maybe half a deck if you've never done this before, maybe one suit, and play with it that way. The other hand, this is the vice hand. The other hand I'm going to call it the action hand. And I talk about this in the How to Rip a Deck of Cards video course as well. So if you're interested in that, go to howtoripadeckofcards.com. But for today, what I want to tell you is this hand will be the action hand. This one's going to be doing most of the work. Now, the interplay between the two hands, one hand can be a vice, one hand can be the action, and then in the midst of doing the feat, they can change roles. But for our purposes, for understanding things, we need to start somewhere, and that's where we're going to start with this. So my action hand's going to come in, and I'm going to put the cards right against my thumb pad right there, just like that. My thumb's going to come in, and my fingers are going to come in this position, okay? So It's very much like the key grip, but these fingers are pushing against my thumb pad, just like that, okay? So, vice hand in place, thumb pad on the action hands in place. Now I'm going to go opposing forces. This hand is going to exert force that way. This hand is going to exert force that way. As I do that, the cards form an S shape, and you can see there will be a shearing effect that will happen between this knuckle of my index finger and this joint knuckle of my index finger on the other hand. So I'm come in and just put that pressure right there, and it starts to shear right across there. So I'm directing forces in two different directions with as much security and clamp down tightness as I can, so that the cards will come apart in their weakest point, which is right in the center of that S shape. I get about halfway through, and then I can bring this index finger in and continue that same kind of action, and then just pull them apart. That is the fundamental, basic way that we teach to rip cards. If you just take that and you put it into practice, you will most likely be able to, within a few months, be able to rip a full deck of cards. The same principles apply to bending steel. I got a 60 penny nail, and I got a couple of wraps here. These are just leather wraps. They're fairly worn. And I'm gonna wrap this nail up. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about this as I'm doing it. So I like to wrap it as tightly as I can. Now usually when I'm doing a show, I'll do exactly what I'm doing right now, and I'll be talking while I'm doing the wrapping, okay? If I'm working on very difficult pieces, just in my training, I may wrap them in a different way, put rubber bands on them, make sure they're tighter, put chalk in, all that sort of stuff. But for our purposes right now, this is all we need to talk about. So I've got that one wrapped so that the flap is toward me on the point, okay? To wrap the head, I'm gonna come in from the same direction and wrap that way. And you can see both of the flaps are in the same configuration. I do that because if I were to start over here on this one, so if I were to take this and put the wrap between myself and the nail and wrap it down, and then turn it 180 degrees, and then do the same thing again on the head, what winds up happening, you can see that I have one flap that opens this way and one flap that opens that way. When I go to put pressure on the nail, I want both my flaps to be facing the same direction. I want to be wrapped the same way, because if I don't, it tends to loosen as I apply pressure. And if I get them both going in the same direction, it tends to tighten as I apply pressure. And if the wraps get loose and slip, then I'm not able to transmit as much force from my body into the nail itself. Now, I'm going to show you double overhand technique, okay? Double overhand technique looks like this. We have wrapped up the nail, and some people go way out on the ends with the wraps. Some people come in with the wraps touching. I don't really care one way or the other about that. I was wrapping and talking at the same time and wrapped it the way I told you not to wrap it. Let me start over on that. So, there we go. So, I don't really care in the initial stages how much space there is between wraps in the middle, whether you're way out on the end or not. The further out towards the end you are, the better leverage you're going to have and the heavier pieces you can bend. In close together like this makes it more difficult, so there's a way to progress built into this from wide to narrow without having to change the strength of the nail that you're using. I didn't talk about it with the cards. There's a way to progress there too. You would get to where, say you can rip a half a deck fairly easily. You can just simply add a couple of cards, 1 or 2 cards a week every week, and you incrementally increase the resistance without really noticing it. And keeping things as easy as you possibly can means that eventually things that are very difficult will become easy for you. If you make your training as hard as you possibly can, then eventually something breaks and not necessarily the nail of the card you're working with, and you wind up making things that should be very easy very difficult. So I like to keep things as easy as I possibly can in my training in terms of keeping things intelligent. That doesn't mean that I don't exert a lot of force or that I don't train relatively hard. What it means is I don't make anything harder than it needs to be. I don't take great pride in injuring myself or how sore I am, anything like that. What I take pride in is execution of the feats. So now I've got this wrapped up, and I'm right-handed. So my right hand is my dominant hand, and it's going to exert a little more force than my left hand, generally speaking. For double overhand, we come in, we put the bar as close to the neck as we can. I like to put my thumbs against my collarbones. The end of the nail is touching me about right there on either hand. Now, my vise is actually going to be my left hand. It doesn't move as much as the right hand. Remember I said earlier that there's interplay in between the two. Sometimes the role can change. In this particular case, it's mostly the right hand is the action hand, mostly the left hand is the vice hand, and the force is exerted into the center of the bar. Now the way the force is exerted, there's a, I'm going to lay that down for a second. If I'm starting in this position, I have elevated and retracted my shoulder blades. So I'm shrugging up and back. It's much like this position right here is where I'm starting. The motion of the bend is not with the wrist, and it's not flapping a chicken wing like this. You have very little power that way. The motion of the bend is to take those elevated scapula that are retracted and move them diagonally down and out. So it looks like that. If I just move my shoulder blades, there's the action. It's nothing but my shoulder blades moving. You can see that that makes my hands come closer together and also changes the angle so that if there were something in my hands at that angle, it's forcing it to bend. It allows me to put much more force into the piece of steel. We combine that together with a little bit of spinal flexion as we go, and think of dropping the weight down. Huge amount of power goes into it. You'll notice as I do this bend, there's a lot of distance between my elbow and my ribs. If I go this way, I lose power. If I go forward and down, because my scapula are going forward and down, power gets translated directly into the piece. A little more on the right side. If you watch closely, you'll see that there's more action happening on my right, on this side, than there is in my left hand on this side. So let me show you what it looks like. I bring it in, shoulder blades are up. Now, did you see that this one moved and this one stayed relatively still? This is functioning as my vise. This is functioning as my action hand, and I got it bent almost to 90 just on that one hit. I'll adjust, reposition, hit it again until my knuckles come together, and now we're well past 90. So now the next motion is going to be to open this hand up and put my fingers on the back of this hand, and this left hand is still my vice hand. My right hand is coming up and over, or my right elbow rather is coming up and over and driving down like this. Now from here, I'm going to go to fingers interlaced and repeat that same sort of action. Now as I'm doing that, two things are going on. One, my fingers are interlaced and I'm attempting to pull them apart, but not this way. I'm attempting to pull them apart by moving the heel of my hand towards each other. So it's an opposing force thing that looks like that. As the heel of my palms move in, the back of the hand moves out just like that. But if I interlace the fingers, it goes right there. And then that way, all of that force goes into that already moving, already warm, already bending weak spot of the nail. The part that's making contact when we get to there is right here. And if you look at that, that lines up the bones of the forearm all the way to the elbow. If I put the pressure here, then I've got given my wrist that we don't want to have happen. So, just like this, and again, it's shoulder blades are up, and they travel forward. like that, forward and down. Now the final bit that I got is I'll put it in what's called a gripper position. If you're familiar with like Captain's Crush gripper, it looks like this. Nail goes deep, or the end of the nail goes deep into this spot right here. The other part, the other end of it, my middle finger is right on the tip of the nail. This hand again is my vise. This hand is going to be my action hand. So I'm going to do that same action again with the scapula as I'm doing a crush grip, pushing into this hand. So this point that was on the end of the nail earlier is now going to be right on my ring finger, and that's going to be where all the force gets transferred into this part of the nail. So I'm going to come up and over like this. And then I'd say that's a completed bend. So you can see those same principles apply to different degrees regardless of the feat. So you have something that acts as a vice, you have something that acts as an action, and it directs maximal force into the weakest point of whatever you're working with, cards, steel, whatever. If we're doing a longer piece, same sort of thing. The way I do a long bend under the leg, if you've seen any video of that, my right hand is locking the piece into position. It goes between my legs and comes out the my left side behind my hip. Now I've got this locked into place with my hand here up against my leg. Fulcrum that exists on my femur. So all of the force of all of my power that I'm pulling with is going to go right into that part where the femur is making contact with it. This applies across the board to feats. Learning to scroll steel will definitely teach you how to do this. Learning to rip cards definitely teaches you how to do this. If you understand these concepts, you can shortcut your progress. I know there's no real shortcuts, but there are smarter ways to doing things. If you do things smartly, you progress faster. So it's not like you're cutting corners, it's that you are hacking into it in such a way that you are able to do it maximally fast with the quickest progress and the safest way possible. Now, the second thing that I want to talk to you about that we cover in OldTime Strongman University is the mindset behind these things. It is vitally important to be able to see in your imagination what you want your finished product to look like. So if I look at a deck of cards and I'm thinking about ripping it into a particular configuration, like taking a notch out of it or taking a corner off of it or even ripping it into halves and quarters, I need to be able to understand what that looks like after I'm done, and I need to be able to visualize myself, not just like seeing myself do it from watching on a video screen kind of thing, but actually see myself from first person point of view with whatever the implement is in my hands, the cards, the steel, whatever. I need to be able to see and feel that happening as a successful visualization, and that will skyrocket my ability to be able to make the improvements. A few years ago at OldTime Strongman University, I certified on the Iron Mind Red Nail. I had been practicing and training 2 or 3 times a week physically, but I was also pretty much every day taking some time and getting very relaxed and visualizing myself first person point of view, imagining myself doing the act of bending the nail and what it would feel like when it was done. And I made it so that it was effortless, that it was just easy, that I just blasted through it. There was no struggle to it at all. And when I would do this, I would like mentally create all these details that I could. And it worked so well that not once but twice while I was doing a visualization, I sneezed and kind of knocked myself out of my hypnotic trance because I was sniffing chalk that I had put on my hands and on the wraps in my imaginal act. So my imaginal act was so vivid that it caused a physical response to chalk dust in the air. I knew when that happened that it was simply a matter of time and practice, that there was no way I was not going to accomplish that feat. Dennis tells a similar story about a wrench that he bent in a hotel room one night. He went to sleep thinking about bending this wrench that he had attempted to bend and was unable to. Woke up in the middle of the night in a hotel room and bent the wrench in his underwear. He talks about it in his wrench bending course. I may have some of the details off on that a little bit, but that's the general idea of it. So that mental game is what separates a successful strongman from someone who is just kind of playing around at it. And then what I found is that same ability to put yourself in a position of doing that imaginal act, because the subconscious mind does not make a differentiation between something that is vividly imagined and something that happens in 3D reality. So if we can do that, we've convinced our subconscious mind that it's already happened. We've planted the seed in there that it is not only possible, but that it is already a fact. And if we can do that, then it must unfold that way. That is just a glimpse into the mindset there. But what I realized is that doesn't just apply to feats of strength. I've been able to take that same concept, that same practice, and apply it to other things that have nothing to do with feats of strength, like business-related things, relationship-related things, health in general related things. It's a phenomenal ability to develop, and something that you might not expect feats of strength to teach you, but it does. Absolutely does. And then the final thing I want to talk to you about today that we will cover at OldTime Strongman University has to do with being able to deliver a message. Now, I do this for a living. I get on stages, I speak, I perform, and I get to share a message that's important to me, and I get paid to do it. And Dennis did the same thing and continues to do the same thing. He has a message that is more important than the feats. And when you have that, and you can use the feats to support that message, you can make an impact on people's lives in a way that no one else can, because they can visually and viscerally see these feats of strength and understand the connection between that and achieving what might seem impossible. You twist open a horseshoe in front of somebody, something that doesn't seem possible, and you tell them that this is primarily a mental game and explain to them how it is primarily a mental game, that the physical part is really just practice and intelligent progression, then you can inspire people to develop their own superhuman powers. Now, it may not be superhuman strength. It probably won't be if you talk to as many people as I do. But people can make that connection. They can relate. And we will show you how to figure out what your story is. We will show you how to construct that story. We'll show you how to contact people so that you can get on stages consistently and earn money, if that's what you want to do, so that you can share your story with other people. This is my life's mission, is to be able to help other people discover and develop their own superhuman powers. And I'm asking you guys who are watching this video and have stuck with me this far to come and join us at OldTime Strongman University. There's a link below that you can click on that will take you to the registration page, and 2 days worth of instructional material that covers ripping cards, bending short steel like spikes like I just did, those two things, bending horseshoes, twisting them open and doing various things with them, driving a nail through a board without a hammer, and then also we're going to do some stuff with some longer pieces of steel like 3 and 4 feet, learning how to twist and coil, basic introduction to bending and scrolling steel like that. This kind of training will develop a kind of strength that you cannot get any other way. What Bud Jeffries called true full body functional power. It is holistically a health practice, and not just in the physical sense, but also in the mental sense. It is an amazing path to walk, and I encourage you to join us at OldTime Strongman University. Again, that link is down below. Click on it. We've only got room for 15 people, so I highly encourage you to get on board as quick as you can, because this thing always sells out. We always have a waiting list, so don't be that guy or that girl that's stuck on the waiting list. Come join us. Come develop your superhuman strength. Love to see you there at OldTime Strongman University.